This medal is called the Air Medal, and that's given basically if you're in the theater and you're flying missions, and it's not a very distinguished medal. It everybody I think that flew in combat got that, not for. And then this medal, which is the blue and red and white, is called the Distinguished Flying Cross. And there are two of them. I got one and then an additional one. And that's supposedly for meritorial service or something like that. But they're given to if you're a squadron leader or something like that. Or if you have a certain amount of kills, you know. That's not given out in great quantity, I wouldn't say.
Right. So
I'd say out of, I might be wrong, but maybe out of 50 pilots that might have gone through, there might have been 3 or 4 of those given.
wow, that's amazing. So why did you receive that medal?
Because of leadership, leading flights, leading squadrons, your all around aeronautical ability.
Okay. Did you have a certain number of kills that allowed you to have that medal?
I had 5 kills.
Right, to make you an ace.
I just wrote a journal, a book, and which was taken from my parents' letters to me and my letters to them, plus a diary that I kept all the way through it, which is rather unique because it's not a book of recollections. It's a book that was taken, 20 years later. It's taken that day, written down.
That's so cool.
So there's a lot of difference between recollections and memories and the actual.
Right.
Oh yeah, these there are little stars on those, so you get 10, 20. I think I got 30 of these air medals. That's this one.
Wow.
And 2 Distinguished Flying Cross and 1 Congressional Medal. Oh, here it is. You probably can't see that. You ought to pick that up close if you want a picture of it.
So tell a little bit about that and why you received that.
This was given this year or earlier to there are only about 30 or 40 of these. Ace was a person that got 5 or more kills. And this medal was given to the surviving aces. And there are about 30 of them left, and they're still alive. And there were, I don't know how many, but
30 of us. You're one.
But maybe were 500 aces or something like that. And that was a medal given for the survivors, which was about 20 of us, I guess, or 30.
Okay.
And that was given in Washington by the
president, right?
well,
Officially.
they don't say the president.
Yeah.
It's the Congressional Medal.
Okay.
So I think it's given by Congress.
And that was just last year,
Uh-huh.
right? Yeah.
And that's
Very
sort of, that meant you had to have at least 5 kills and probably had quite a few. I had 148 missions, which was 2 complete missions, which was a lot more than 95% of the people who flew in the war.
Wow.
I think it's interesting to know that you were all alone and what you would do in protecting yourself.
Yeah.
The airplanes that were used in World War II, our particular squadron, which is a unit of maybe 30 or 40 guys. And our squadron started in England, and they flew a British plane because the Americans didn't have a decent airplane. So they flew an airplane called the Spitfire, and the name has been pretty well
Is this
generally.
No.
Yeah, that's not a Spitfire.
Okay.
And they all look the same, though, to somebody who doesn't know.
Like me.
The squadron then, that would have been about 1941. The British took mercy on the poor old American pilots because they came up with an airplane called the P-39, the Airacobra, which was a real flop. It was incapable of combating against the Germans. The Germans flew the ME-109 Messerschmitt, which was a very fine airplane. But so we started out, when I say we, our squadron, not I, they started out in England, and they flew down across Europe, went to Gibraltar, and then flew down into the desert of Morocco. And at that point, we had been flying what had been called the Warhawk, the P-40. The P-40 was used in the Far East by General Chennault. I don't know if that means anything, but he fought with the Chinese in the 30s. He was an original kind of a air warrior before World War II or anything. World War II didn't start till I don't know what the official date was. My participation was about 1942. But the war had the Battle of Britain. Well, I don't know how much I should digress.
One question they had is, how old were you in 1942 when you started?
23 years old.
23. And how long were you an active military member?
3 years. So.
Okay.
There were probably, okay, let me finish where we went. Then we went out across Africa and went up to Italy. And our unit was based in Italy, all the way from the boot, all the way up to Rome.
Okay.
And we flew missions both in Italy, in Europe, including Germany, France, Yugoslavia, Romania, in the Far East. That was our circle, and we flew out of Italy, joined the 8th Air Force heavy bombers, which were the ones that bombed all of Europe and blew Europe almost out of its pants. And they needed protection from the German planes. This was the key of the warfare. And the reason that 1942, it was 43, was important was because our big heavy bomber force of maybe 1,600 planes, 600 down in Italy and about 1,000 out of Great Britain. And they would fly over Germany. But in the wisdom of the high command, they were very well armed and had guns in their belly and the tail and the top of the plane and everything in the B-17, B-24s. And they found out, lo and behold, that they could not protect themselves. And so they needed fighter escort. And they ceased bombing for a while because of the Americans and the British had no long-term fighter planes. But the first big battle, air battle, was the Battle of Britain. And that was, of course, the British could fly and take off and fly up to 25,000, 30,000 feet in their Spitfires, and the Germans had to come from the continent to come over to bomb London. And basically the British beat the Germans in that particular battle. That battle, Hitler, who was the dictator of Germany, had all his landing equipment, barges and ships and ships, flat barges to carry troops. They were all located on the English Channel, ready to invade. But Hitler decided he couldn't invade if he didn't have air control. And so that was the reason for the Battle of Britain. So the British, and as Winston Churchill said, never have we owed so much to so few, because the British beat the Germans in that battle, and Hitler called off his invasion of Great Britain. And that would have been a monumental change in civilization if they had made that landing. Well, the fighter airplanes basically were fighting other fighter airplanes, and that was the Spitfire against the Messerschmitt. After that was over, then the American forces became stronger. The Battle of the Atlantic Ocean, which is where the submarines of the Germans were destroying all the cargo ships going from America to Great Britain, where they would have where they would build up their supplies. So when the Allies returned the Germans with their favor, and they made it, and we're going to make it a landing on the continent. So that battle took place in 1942, and that was the savior. For one is the Atlantic Ocean then became a place where we could ship all our planes and our equipment and everything else, because of course the United States was the arsenal of defense. They produced all the planes and the guns and equipment and food and everything else for the Allied forces. The Allied forces were made up of the French, what was left of them, and the American and the English forces initially. Later in the war, the Russians joined the Americans. They were our allies, believe it or not. So anyhow, the evolution of the fighter airplane went from that poor original P-39 to the P-40, and then there were some others like the P-38, P-47, and the instigated the need for this long-range fighter, which was our fighter, the P-51. The P-51, where those other planes were able to fly maybe 2 hours, 2 to 3 hours. The P-51 was so built to fly almost up to 6 hours.
Wow.
And so we could escort the American bombers all the way into Berlin.
Wow.
And therefore the bombers of the 5th Air Force and the 12th Air Force were able to be effective, if you want to call it that way, of destroying most of the buildings of Europe.
Right.
But the P-51 was the sole American airplane that would make that long trip.
Could it go at a much higher altitude too?
And it would go up to 40,000 feet, where the present, not effectively, maybe 35,000.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the prior planes we had would really go to 28,000, maybe 30,000.
Okay. And would it travel faster too? So.
Well, the attribute of a fighter airplane, if you had to shoot down another air, he was after you.
Okay. Right.
And we were after him. So you had to be superior, not just fly better, which you probably couldn't achieve. But you had to climb faster, you have to cruise faster, you have to carry more guns, and you have to have the range. And the P-51's Mustang had those attributes. So they could fly all the way into Berlin or over to Poland, and certainly all over the Near East, Middle East.
Right. How many planes, so how many P-51s were in your squadron when you would fly in?
You'd probably go out and you'd go out in flights of, you basically flew a unit of 2 planes, and the 2 planes then formed up to make 24 planes, which was a squadron.
Okay.
And then the squadron, when you had 2 squadrons, you had a wing. And so those were the reasons some of these medals were given by if you were a wing commander or a squadron commander, you were recognized for that.
Gotcha.
But anyhow, finally the Germans ran out of defenses, and the Allied forces just, as you know, bombed city after city after city, and maybe in a lot of cases indiscriminately, where the Germans, of course, bombed the heck out of Coventry and other places in England, but we returned the favor and bombed all kinds of places. They did try, for example, when we took Rome, and there were agreements that Rome would not be bombed, and so we never bombed Rome. And that was not true. The Germans bombed anything, and I think we did in Europe too. Well, the Vatican also was not bombed.
Okay.
But as you know, many of the sacred and beautiful cathedrals and buildings and things like that were all destroyed
Right.
in Europe and in England. So finally we wore out the Germans. The Russians were feared and disliked would be another better word, by all Europeans. And so when it came to conquering Berlin, for example, all the Allies just prayed for the Americans to take them rather than the Russians, because the Russians were pretty savage.
Mm-hmm.
And after the war was over, then they had peace conferences and divided up Europe in all kinds of odd ways that were not basically the geographic, ethnic unity that had taken place, where each country had its own borderline and own language and customs and everything else like that. And the wisdom of the American peacemakers, they just divided them up. I took a chalk line, and they created what is now one of the big problems, because all these countries are divided up half and half between their native population and people they were divided into, if you see what I mean.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right.
So on we go, and the
Sure.
wars have continued and never really ended in Europe.
Yeah.
But that was about the end of the World War II.
Nice.
Due to shoot down an airplane, and I don't think you girls are duck shooters, but
Some of the students are, though.
if you shoot at something at a right angle, your opportunity is pretty poor in hitting that target. And the way you have to do it is get behind them, and you're in the same plane, the same direction, and you shoot them from the rear end, the back of the plane. So basically, your formations that you fly were such that when you looked out of the cockpit, you had another guy looking out, and your plane, the other plane that flew in your element, as they called it, he was looking like where you are, up behind me, and I was looking up behind him. And so you had this cross vision going on to see the enemy, which was trying to attack you from the rear.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you were going into a flight of German planes, you probably had also a bunch of German planes coming after you in the back of you. And so that was the main task, the main tactic you had. You'd fly along, going out there, and you'd have belly tanks carrying auxiliary gasoline underneath your wings. And as soon as you got into the battle area, so to speak, you, particularly if you saw some enemies pretty close to you, you pull a lever and drop your belly tanks. And then you would either attack or be attacked. And if you were attacked and the plane was coming at you, the leader would say, "Brake left, brake right," or something. And you turn your plane sharply, as sharply as you could turn it. You can't turn a plane too sharply or it will stall and stop flying. So you have to have a controlled, sharp turn. And you can do that with other little fancy things like doing it, cutting your throttle, and going up higher, and then drop down behind a German might be following you. And there are certain tactics like that, but most of them are just climbing up in the back of some guy, and the 51 could turn inside of an ME-109. So if you were the lead plane, this was the ME-109, you could turn inside and he'd have to always stay outside. And the guns shot through the propeller. I mean, through the rotation of a propeller. So if you're shooting for Lindsay, corrected a little bit for wind and things like that, you would go in towards the rear that way, and then he would peel off this way, and you go here. But if you couldn't turn as sharp as he could turn, and pretty soon come around and come behind. That was called the Lufberry Circle, and
On top of you.
and so, but usually you either got the guy or damaged him, or he just fled.
Right.
You didn't. There were a bunch of planes, and it didn't mean you'd get every one. You might get out of 20, you might get one. So, by the same token, as you go after somebody, you have to be nimble to avoid getting clobbered by somebody else.
Right. Did you ever have to eject from
No.
your plane?
Never had to bail out, and we used to fly shrapnel. You know what a shrapnel was? Unlike the bombers were just like an infantry group. They had to fly like this, release their bombs at a certain point, and calculate the drift and all such as that where the bombs would land. So they couldn't go whipping around like that. We, however, if we got into a big barrage of shrapnel, flak as it's called, flak coming up, we could evade it. And we'd go up or not down, but we'd go up or around. And so flak didn't usually hurt us, where it just absolutely disseminated the bombing force. It was a terrible enemy of theirs. But that was I got hit a couple times with flak, but not badly. Not enough to do any damage. But and our fighters did get hit down, but it wasn't a major risk, because you could see as you were flying along, you could see in front of you maybe some flak starting to come up where they were firing, and so you could avoid it. In the planes that we flew, you'd have to probably fire at 100 yards behind the plane, or 100 yards to be able to be lethal. Now, a fighter goes up now, he can fire at a plane maybe 5 miles away. He never sees the plane. He can shoot somebody down, never sees the plane, one way or another. It's all by radar direction, and probably to a great extent controlled from the ground.
Yeah, so I was going to say the technology is really what's making that
So
shift.
this is really the end of the propeller fighter airplane usage. It might be used in some little even now, where they're bombing the ISIS and people like that. They're probably flying eye to eye because they're doing low level bombing, but those planes are flying so fast, and they don't fly in formation; they fly singly, and they carry a big bomb, and then they're going, you know,
Right.
and they're flying, you know, 600-700 miles an hour. So it's a different warfare now. And their planes are vectored onto each other so a pilot no longer uses his own imagination or what have you. He's just told, steer this, steer that, steer this, steer that.
Right.
And then they say, fire now. And he might not even see the target or anything.
There was a question about making decisions and following orders. What was that like for you?
Well, you'd keep pretty good formation. But if you got jumped, as they say, by a bunch of German planes, you pretty broke down and guarded your own hide or went after the plane by yourself. So there was an awful lot of individual flying. It wasn't, you didn't fly around a beautiful, nice organization like that.
And how much communication was there between the four? Weren't you always a foursome or not?
Twosome, foursome, eight or 10 maybe. And you could, if you got in a battle, you couldn't control if you were the commander or leader of it. You couldn't command guys. There's a plane coming after him. You couldn't say, sit still now and everything will be all right. It'd be up to him to figure out how he could save his soul if he was being jumped. So it got down to being an awful lot of individual tactics if you got in a big scramble with people.
What was your favorite mission, or one that stands out to you?
I can't remember any of them really.
Yeah.
I can't differentiate. So
Yeah.
don't.
I'm sure it all blends together at this point.
I'll tell you one mission.
Okay.
We were over Ploesti, which was the big oil center of Romania.
Mm-hmm. And
one of the guys yelled out, I've been hit. I've been hit. You had a liquid cool radiators underneath the airplane. And that, he said, I've been hit. I've got a glycol leak all over my bubble land canopy. Oh, that airplane's in there, actually. But, well, it turned out he was relieving himself, and instead of being hit, his pitot relief tube was filled with urine. And it all gone over the inside of the canopy.
Oh my gosh.
And he realized that he'd made a mistake.
Oh my gosh.
But there were various.
Do you have a picture of you in your plane that you could find?
No, I can't find one. I could get one maybe. There's a model of the airplane in my room there if you want to see it.
Okay, I'll go grab it.
Glass, plexiglass kind of a thing on a slide.
Mm-hmm.
And you could pull that back to get in and out of it on the ground, or if you had a parachute. And your guns were out here in the wings, and I guess I thought we fired through. Well, you would on turning, obviously.
Fire through.
Yeah, but they are timed, which was figured out in the World War I, so you could shoot between the rotation of the barrel. You carry belly tanks underneath the plane, and those are the planes that you release those when you got into battle, so the plane would fly better. fly, because you had a big gasoline tank right behind your seat. Your seat was in there, and the controls in front of this, and you had a big auxiliary tank in there. You have these two tanks out here, and when you got about, say, you had a 500-mile trip, and you knew you were getting into some enemy stuff, you'd use all the gasoline out of this part behind your seat, because that made the plane fly just like a lame duck. It was so much weight, and it was never devised that way originally. So your plane stumbled off, and you couldn't control it very well, and everything. But it was all right to climb up and just fly straight and level. Then you'd get rid of your your wing tanks, and you'd be left with your other tanks which are in your wings. So you had three different sources of fuel for that airplane, and you didn't do anything. You had an armament officer or enlisted man that would arm the plane before you took off with all ammunition such as that. And you had three crewmen. You had your main crewman. I had a fellow by the name of Scotty, and you really became pretty familiar, shall we say, is not the right word. Depended on him really doing a good job and maintaining your plane. And he was maintaining the plane. And I never had a plane a few times. Engine would quit. I remember one time by about 25,000 feet, and the engine went out. And I had to slide this out, and I had all my belts off, and I was ready to jump. All of a sudden, the plane took off.
Oh my gosh.
And I had that happen a couple of times. But the crew chief, that was his name, was very, he treated his airplane like his little baby. And they were very, very serious about not having any mechanical problems with the plane.
That probably made you feel good.
Yeah. It says here the P-51 Mustang was perhaps the best all-around pursuit ship of World War II. The fighter went from an abstract idea in a procurement contract to a flying prototype in less than 6 months. I can tell you about that, but you want to know. Still a mainstay of unlimited class air racing. The airplane enjoys legendary service history. This one bears the markings of the 325th Fighter Group. You still see quite a few. One of the few airplanes that survived World War II. This one is still used in racing and exhibitions and stuff like that. It was an easy airplane it was a better, more refined the airplanes got, the easier they were to fly, even though they might do a lot more. But this, for example, had a wide landing gear. They don't show it out here. So if you landed and you had a crosswind or difficult landing conditions, you could land on that one wheel. If the wind was coming this way, you'd have to put the plane in that category and land on that one wheel, and then when it stalled, it flopped down and your plane was,
Wild. Did you do much landing on aircraft carriers?
none.